Today. I'll start with a few general questions, and for everyone watching, please feel free to put your questions in the chat here on Zoom or on YouTube. So my first question for you guys is a little background about the film. So this happened in 1991, and you guys are about 10 years younger than Latasha, if I'm right. So do you guys have any memories of this event from that age? And if not, like, what was the death for you guys, considering it happened in the 90s?
First of all, hi Fanta. Thank you so much for moderating, being in conversation with us. Thank you, John, and the Bronx Documentary Center.
Such a pleasure.
So I was born and raised in South Central Los Angeles, and I was a young girl during the riots, way too young to have any vivid memories. I just remember faintly, like my mom and dad not letting my brother and I go outside, remembering just kind of the chaos in the surrounding areas, and remembering like the fire and the smoke and how vast that was. But it wasn't until later in my 20s that I actually learned about Latasha. You know, I only knew about Rodney King and being a South Central native, and a lot of LA natives, you know, only associate the riots with Rodney King. And so for me, it was interesting as an adult to re-examine and to revisit this story that had only existed within the context of her trauma, or that had been really forgotten or glossed over in regards to other discussions surrounding the riots. And I'll let Janice speak for herself of
I'm from Detroit, and I too didn't learn of Latasha until I was older. Until paying, you know, more attention to Tupac lyrics. I feel like we all got a dose of who Rodney King was. But Latasha, it took a while. You know, I didn't learn about her until later. But actually, the poem at the end of the film, Latasha's Shield, was written a week before I was born. So, like, she wrote that February 6th. My birthday is February 13th. And then, you know, she was killed a month later. So I was just kind of, coming into the world.
Okay, thank you. So my following question is about Shanice and Ty. And I just want to know how you got them to open up about such a painful part of their childhood. And what was it like getting to know Latasha through Shanice and Ty?
So I reached out to Shanice and Ty on Facebook. Before that, whenever there had been discussions about Latasha or interviews, remembering her in different documentaries, people have always talked to Latasha's late aunt, Denise Harlins, who fought tirelessly to get justice for her niece. You know, Denise unfortunately passed in 2018 on Christmas Day, but she was the founder of the Latasha Harlins Justice Committee. And I'd only met her a couple of times, but I knew for the film, I really wanted the perspective of individuals that were the same age of Latasha during her death. And so Ty and Shanice were both 15 at that time as well. And I just reached out to them on Facebook. I wanted to be very transparent and honest about what my goal was for the film, why I was interested in this story, wanting to reimagine her life and not focus just on her death. And really wanting them to feel safe and held in this process and this experience. You know, the film took about 2.5 years to make, and it was a very intentional, slow process, because this is something that in the past has always been, you know, quick information. It's always just been about her death, never really a deep dive into who she was. So wanting to take the time that Latasha deserved, that Ty and Shanice deserved, wanting to make sure they felt held in that process. And again, wanting them to consent to being a part of this, because so often in documentary, you know, we've seen past experiences where people just extract information and re-trigger or re-traumatize. And that's something we did not want to happen to Ty and Shanice. And so a piece of writing that really inspired that was, I'm so sorry, that car was extremely loud. A piece of writing that inspired that is called Beyond Empathy by Sonia Childress, that really speaks about how we need to re-engage with stories surrounding communities of color. And throughout this process, just wanting them to feel held, for it to be a healing experience and not something that solely focused on the trauma, because they don't need, you know, they have had to live with this every day. They're in their 40s. So wanting this film to be something that allowed not only them to heal, but the community to heal while watching it.
Yeah, it happened super organically. I didn't come in until a little later. So at that point, Sophia and our producer, Fan Mudurji, they, you know, had a relationship with Ty and Shanice. But it's been really just beautiful and very like monumental in my own life. I'll speak for myself, but I'm sure Sophia feels the same way, of watching the healing take place, of Ty and Shanice being able to, you know, live in their full truth and tell this story, and to be held in that. We did a pop-up magazine tour, and that was the first time they had really seen it with an audience. And I sat next to them and I was shaking the entire time, because I'm like, this is, you know, I witnessed them nodding along with things. They, you know, when the song came up, she sang a bit with it. And when they both had those moments of tears, just being next to them, seeing it for the first time, it was such a blessing, but it was so, I don't know how to describe it. It was such a rich experience. And then after that, they left as soon as they exited the theater, as soon as it was over. And I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And I find them, they're downstairs in the basement of historic LA Theater, just having fun like they're kids. And they were just, it was really beautiful to watch them kind of seep back into that moment. And Latasha felt so present. So it's just been such a joy to just witness their fullness and them coming into, you know, back into a lot of the things that they wanted for themselves, that Latasha really helped, you know, push and instill in them.
Yeah, and then I do want to mention that moment that Janice speaks about. It was the first time they saw it with an audience, but before then, we always sent them different cuts of the film to see, because we never wanted anything in the film to be a shock or a surprise for them. And we wanted them to feel, we wanted to make sure they were happy with how the story was being told, and that they felt comfortable seeing themselves cry on camera, seeing themselves reminisce, seeing themselves re-experience, you know, these memories that were traumatic. And since then, they've probably been to about maybe 3 screenings in person in total, but always showing them different parts of the film throughout the process, so that we knew, so that they were prepared for when an audience would see it, when it was public. And so that was another way to hold them through that process.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. So now we can move on to like the filmmaking process. So what was the creative process like for you guys, trying to, like, regarding the visuals, because they're gorgeous, like, and personifying a death that happened so long ago? What was it like? Because there, obviously you guys couldn't have exact people, not everyone who's present could be in the film. So what was it like finding people to portray Latasha and Shanice and Ty, and like just different scenes? Like, what was the process like coming up with that for you guys?
Yeah, so what was really exciting and also a bit intimidating was knowing that there would not be any archival footage for us to use in the film. And that's something I really wanted, that challenge, and we wanted to create this new framework of how do we reimagine our stories and our history when there is no longer tangible evidence outside of oral history, and understanding that that happens so often with stories of, you know, Black folks, but more realistically, stories about Black women and Black girls, how those have been erased, how the archive does not allow them to exist in their fullness, and really being inspired by the work of Sadia Hartman, by Alice Walker, by Zora Neale Hurston, and just how they have documented, interrogated the archives, rebirth stories. And so wanting this film, what I call it as a spiritual archive, wanting it to be this reimagining of life and this rebirth of this memory, and wanting it to feel like the audience is going through an intimate dreamscape. They're going through these intimate memories that Ty and Shanice have allowed us to be a part of. So after conducting, you know, the interviews, sitting with the script for a long amount of time, and just constructing it in different ways to find how we wanted the story to flow, and then just really allowing the visuals to come organically and being led by the spirit of Latasha regarding these visuals. I always wanted the young girls to be seen in an image and a light of life, to be seen in their fullness, to be seen as free, wanting to juxtapose images of nature within the landscape of South Central, even just images of the young girl at the ocean, the young girls in the field. So throughout the film, we wanted the image of these different girls to constantly shift, to play with the thought that Latasha could have been any of us. Latasha could have been anyone that we knew. And so never letting any one particular girl be the exact replication of Latasha, but them all resembling this essence of Black girlhood. And so wanting that life to breathe through it. And so there are many times where Janice and I would just walk through South Central, just myself and the camera and us walking around like in her old neighborhood, wanting to feel the energy of that environment,
talking to neighbors.
Yeah, talking to just different people in the community, wanting, going to her high school, her high school does not like speaking about her, but we just wanted to be in the locations where we knew she was, her middle school, her high school, Tam's Burger Joint, and just let the spirit of her like surround us while we had these memories. And audio, feed into our soul. And there were times where Janice would have me just like write letters to Latasha if I felt disconnected from the piece or a bit discouraged. The other thing that we were intentional about is never wanting to show the video footage of her death. We don't like how accessible that is online and how that is the main image that people associate with her. So we reclaimed that by using the VHS aesthetic in the film to be reminiscent of how a home video would be shot during the 80s and 90s, and also taking back, the footage that is of her death and reclaiming what that aesthetic is like for documenting her life.
Yeah. I'm just going to add a little bit to that because Sophia was the cinematographer, editor, producer, director. So a lot of that is just really her creative genius flourishing. The way that she helped Latasha through the process was always with such integrity, always with such respect. Just the way that she would speak about Latasha, speak to Latasha, it was just a really beautiful, like she felt present throughout the whole process. Even those moments when we weren't sure how we were going to end it, or we weren't sure how a couple of scenes would look and feel, it was always just a matter of checking in with Latasha, and just being guided, like Sophia said, by spirit. And it was a really organic, intuitive process, even if we wouldn't use those words in the moments during the process.
Yeah.
Like it really, I don't know, it just all came together.
Yeah, and I also want to acknowledge like how grateful I am for like having a small team at that time. It was very difficult and exhausting to, be the cinematographer, director, and editor, but having Janice as the creative producer, having our other producer, Famu Dorji, who's also our music supervisor, just for the main production aspect of it, it allowed everything to feel intentional, everything to feel personal. It never felt like things were, it felt authentic to how Latasha's story needed to be made. And, grateful to our executive producers and our two funders that they allowed us to work on our own timeline as opposed to something that had to have a quick turnaround, which we don't think would have worked for this film. And even being grateful for our post-production team, our animator, Buki Badunran, and our colorist, Kyle Liu, the different, our other music supervisor, Jen. Sorry, we have such a small team. I feel like I have to shout everyone out, but there's not time for that. So if you go to the website, you can see everyone's names. But just everyone was so supportive of the time that needed to exist for this piece to work. Being intentional about making sure Black women were a part of the creative process from production to post-production, and just wanting every part to feel as spiritual and intentional as possible.
Yeah, every part of the process, and with all of our collaborators, each facet of production was steeped in this deep respect for Latasha, steeped in this deep acknowledgement that she should still be here, and this longing to honor and to venerate an ancestor.
Absolutely. I just want to take a brief moment to remind people to continue asking questions in the chat, and we already have one. So I think this is coming from Aman, And they're asking, what was the process of beginning the initial edit, and how did you know how to start the edit?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like everyone has their own different editing style, so wanting to support that. I am someone that loves editing. It's my favorite part of the process. And I think I became a bit obsessive with it. So, you know, I know some people, they wait until they have all the footage to sit down with it and go through it. But I'm someone that as soon as I finish, like as soon as we finish any day of filming, I would come back and look at it and start pulling parts that I loved. And what was great about being the editor and the cinematographer, sometimes I film with the intention of how I want to edit it. So I knew that I wanted, you know, this to feel, I wanted everything to flow as smoothly as possible. I wanted things to feel like it was also, there was disruption in the edit. I wanted the edit to just have an energy to it that helped create the journey outside of just, you know, the audio that we're listening to or the visuals, letting the edit be its own character as well. And so every day after filming or whenever I would film, I would just sit with all the footage, look through it, pull pieces, play around with how I would want to edit. I love doing quick cuts and things kind of blending together that normally wouldn't go together. And just, I love experimenting with edits. So a lot of the times it was just me playing around with it and seeing what felt right, what felt like it was the same language that was, you know, complementary to the story, to the visuals, to the music. But again, letting it be its own character. So I feel like it's hard for me to speak about it because I was so ingrained with it. So I don't know what it was like for Janice to watch from the outside, but I would just say I was obsessive.
I think I've seen every iteration of this film. And it's interesting because you definitely would edit, like you would shoot and then you would sequentially, you would, you know, edit that sequence. But you were editing before you started shooting. You were understanding you were going through the transcripts, and you were going through the actual interviews, and you were like, you know, trying to build an arc of, you know, pulling those two stories together to understand what we're going to be shooting and stuff too. So it was a very hand-in-hand process of your cinematography and your editing. So I feel like, yeah, you've been editing for since the beginning. So
Yeah.
after you did that interview.
Yeah, I think since the first initial shoot, I've just been editing nonstop with it. And there are still things when I watch the film, I'm like, oh, this would have been interesting if I tried that. But there was a time where I had to just let it go and stop. And I'm someone that can get very stuck in my idea of what an edit should be. So it's really interesting. Before we did the festival run, we, as Janice mentioned, screened with Pop-Up Magazine, which is like a touring audio visual live presentation. And we had a very different edit. And one of the producers that worked with us made a suggestion of a different ending that we had. Mm-hmm. And Janice and I really sat with that for some time and realized how that was the right way to let the story end. So also just being grateful for others who watched it and gave their feedback, because I did need to step away at times because I was so deeply ingrained that I couldn't see what needed to change because I was stuck in my habits. So thankful for like Janice and others who provided their feedback on ways that the edit could be more impactful and allow for the intentionality that we wanted to happen.
Yeah, because about midway through being done with shooting, we broke it into 3 pieces, the beginning, middle, and end. And yeah, from there, editing took on a different life. Yeah. After we did that, once we, you know, were firm in the intention that the last sequence was going to be about rebirth, that sort of really influenced how it began, the middle, and it just really became just a self-sustaining kind of recycling and renewal process in editing.
Yeah, putting those titles with the different sections of the film helped. So Janice mentioning rebirth, that understanding that the end of the film was rebirth really just changed how the edit and the visuals needed to exist together.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that question.
Yeah, Thank you to Amon for asking that. My next question is about how you guys came about to making this film about Latasha, especially with creating like an alternate narrative to her death. Seeing how in this day and age there's like an excessive amount of like visuals of murders of Black bodies in the media. Like you guys took a completely different turn to what was like initially known about how she passed away. So could you guys just talk about that a bit?
Yeah.
You want to start first?
Yeah, because we've been firm in just anything that we've seen regarding Latasha, they've shown the footage of her murder. And we were very intentional not to do that. Just because I think that the media is really oversaturated with Black people being killed. I think that we've all seen that too many times, more often than it's healthy. And so we wanted to take a completely different approach and really focus on her life, really sit with Ty and Shanice and talk about who she was and let that seep into the story, let that seep into the visuals, the music, even how we discuss it. Sophia talks about it as, you call it spiritual archive. And that's really, I think, the root of the kind of work that we're doing, is taking a lot of history that we don't have, a lot of history that was erased or just forgotten or buried, and excavating it in a way that still feels very genuine, still feels very authentic, still feels very much the essence of Latasha, and just making it an honoring and not necessarily focusing on the trauma. Because there is a rendition of the story that we could have talked about all of the pain that the Harlan's family went through. And, you know, that's in there because that's intrinsically a part of Latasha's life and her journey. But we just really, not that we wanted to make it lighthearted or anything like that. We knew that there was so much more to her than this young Black girl who died over $1.79 orange juice.
Yeah, I along, you know, supporting what Janice, how Janice beautifully described that. We don't need to see Black death to understand it happens. We don't need to see, you know, lifeless bodies to know that this is something we have been fighting against for, you know, centuries. And something that I always do whenever I'm approaching a new project is think about what are all the ways I've seen this story discussed or portrayed, and then what's the one thing that everyone's missing. And the one thing that's always missing is, how do you talk about her? How do we talk about this without her death being the main focus? So normally I think people, you know, I don't mean to speak for other artists or anything, but in the sense of Black death, normally people start with the trauma and go outward, but we wanted to start with her life and then go inward in that way, because her death is that's not the full picture. That's just a tiny portion. That's the last moment of who she was. And she needs to exist beyond that. And it doesn't make any sense. There's no explanation outside of just the adultification of Black girls, the violence against Black women and Black girls, as to why, you know, it's taken 3 decades for there to be a film that expands beyond those final moments to talk about who Latasha was. There's an amazing book that was written in the 80s by Itabari Najari. I have to pull up the title. It is a beautiful, one of the only books that really goes in depth and spends time with Latasha's family shortly after her death. You know, spends time with Latasha's aunt, her grandmother, tells stories of of Shanice and Latasha as children and Latasha's siblings. And so using that as an example too of what does it mean when we understand how important it is to spend time with these intimate moments, these moments that no one thinks about. You know, it's easy to see the trauma and only focus on that moment of pain, but these families have to go on and keep living when the cameras and the interviews and the newspaper clips stopped coming out, and they had a life before all of that. So really wanting the death to be the smallest portion and understanding that is something systemically that we have to deal with and dismantle, but wanting the life to be what overpowers all of the trauma.
Yeah, I love that we ended on a line, like, and we were kids, you know, we were just kids. because that speaks to the fact that they were kids, like Ty, Shanice, and Latasha, very young, and getting to know Latasha through the people who knew her best, who were the same age, who, you know, saw her go through, you know, those awkward teenage years.
Yes.
We wanted to make sure that that was the lens that we were telling it through, just to sort of, you know, give it that, I don't know, that childlike, because she was taken from us at such a young age, and we really wanted to honor, you know, her age in that as well.
Absolutely, yes. Yes, that's the beautiful part. I don't know if people in Zoom can see the chat, but the name of the book I was referencing is The Last Plantation, Color, Conflict, and Identity, Reflections of a New World Black by Idabare Njeri. Apologies if I'm pronouncing her name wrong. It is my goal to find this brilliant writer because it is truly such stunning, in-depth, intimate, personal. You know, this woman spent such time with the Harlan's family after that incident, and it is one of the only things I've read that allows the family to speak about what happened. Yeah.
Great, that was amazing. Thank you. Well, my next question has to do with the recent uprisings that came about during the pandemic. And do you guys see any parallels between things that happened in the 90s and stuff that happened this year? And do you feel like that your story and the way you documented Latasha's story is something that you're going to use like as a basis to document other stories that came about, or is this like just for her and then something, and you guys are going to do something else?
Mm-hmm. That's such a beautiful question.
It is, yeah. What's interesting is that a couple of months ago, it was in May, right? Black Star and Sophia did a Zoom panel about the correlation between it was the anniversary of the LA uprising. And we were also in that moment of actively uprising. And so, yeah, we've been really meditating on the parallels. It feels like, you know, these different generations of Black folks are in conversation, whether it's us talking to our elders, whether it's, you know, our ancestors and spirit guides leading us towards figuring out new ways of existing, new ways of approaching liberation. And so I definitely see this as a basis of how we handle and how we care for future stories. I know for both of us, we know that this is very necessary work. This is spiritual work. It feels like firework to a certain extent. And we're also holding space for, you know, us as artists to also take care, because it is a lot to hold. And it's a lot to process. We've had to, you know, hold each other through tears and just, you know, the anguish and the anger that comes from really processing what happened and what it means, and the fact that we're still seeing it, and the fact that we keep seeing it, and the fact that we're going to keep seeing it until something happens, and what that means, and us breaking out of a certain passivity that kind of happens in society when we don't know what's next, but then, you know, a catalyst happens and we're like, you know, no more. And so hopefully, you know, we can sustain ourselves with, you know, the guidance of our ancestors, remembering how we feel in this moment to guide the next generation forward, because this isn't going to be solved overnight. And just really calling upon our elders and ancestors and just our experiences, you know, just even your limited experience as being a small child during the LA uprisings in '92, and letting that spiritually propel us forward towards liberation.
Yeah, it's so sorry, there's a lot to say with this. The week that A Love Song for Latasha came out on Netflix, 2 days later is when the verdict was announced for Breonna Taylor. And I remember Janice and I just not knowing how to process it, feeling really lost, feeling really invisible, feeling a lot of the pain that I know Black women have felt constantly when we see how our lives are dismissed. You know, when we see so many incidents still where police individuals use force on high school students. You know, there was a video some time ago of, I can't remember the time frame of years, but of a young girl in high school getting body slammed by one of the school guards in the classroom. Yeah. When there was video footage that came out of these Black kids having a pool party in a neighborhood and the cops getting called and a police officer like kneeling on a young Black girl. There was another incident in North Carolina, I think, where, you know, a Korean owner of a hair salon had an altercation with a Black woman that he thought was stealing. And so we really have got to talk about the adultification that happens from a young age, where Black girls are seen as far more mature than their than their white counterparts, than any other, demographic, where we are seen as loud or threatening or, you know, just all the terms you want to think of. If you even go back to just how, from the term Jezebel to now, of how things have not changed. And even thinking about how Black trans women are killed, and there's no respect for the life of Black cis women, Black trans women, Black girls. So this is work we are going to be doing for a long time. And I hope this film provides a new framework at how we as Black storytellers can talk about this in a way that's more healing for us, more healing for the community. And hoping that this film can be a guide for others to understand ways to reimagine our image, reimagine our life. But it has been very haunting with this current uprising to, you know, experience what it means to be in discussion with this film. And even though it's 30 years later next year, the same things are happening after, the same things were happening before, and just wanting to see Black women and girls get the respect and protection that they deserve.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for answering my questions. I'm going to move on to some more general questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for all of your thoughtful questions. So honored to be in conversation with you, Fanta. Oh, yeah.
The first question is, how has your community in Los Angeles responded to this?
Yeah, it's been so beautiful. The biggest thing that really impacts us is when we find out about people in LA watching the film and how they were nervous or intimidated or scared, not intimidated, they were just nervous to see it because they thought they were going to see her death. They didn't know what to expect. They've always had films just rehash the trauma. And so for us, it's been so healing, the different messages or responses we've gotten from Black women who have felt seen, who have felt understood, have felt heard. That is more than anything that we've ever wanted. Los Angeles to feel so seen and remembered. You know, we're still in the process of working with Netflix to do some really, some work within the community, because as we mentioned, there's still so much work to be done. So feeling really grateful to have Netflix supporting, you know, not just, you know, having the film be accessible, but now wanting there to be impact within the community. And yeah, it's just, it's been so healing, and I don't even know if I can say rewarding, just because it's so beyond that. We just wanted the community to feel seen and understood. And for us, I've always wanted South Central to have an archive of Latasha, whether the film did festivals or was on Netflix or not, just wanting this to exist for South Central, for people to remember Latasha in her fullness. And it's been beautiful, the support that's come from Los Angeles, that's come from Black women. And there's still so much more that we have in store with community impact on the way.
Yeah, it's so cute that anytime one of Ty or Shanice's friends, when they see it, they automatically, you know, send us their response. They're like, my friend just watched it and they loved it. So we get a lot of that, and that's been, yeah, like Sophia said, the most rewarding part of this is having Black women come back to us and say that, you know, they appreciate being held through that experience, and they appreciate the care that went into it, and them articulating how deeply they felt that. Because that's really why we did it. Yeah.
So the next question is, the idea of storytelling in a way to create alternate histories is reminiscent of Alexandra Bell's counter-narrative project, the one of like telling, making different headlines for the New York Times front pages. So what do you think the power of these approaches to documentary storytelling is, especially when it comes to the Black community?
Yeah, I love Alexandra Bell's work, and they've been so supportive of the film. And I remember the first time seeing their work, just like being so moved by what it means to reclaim our history, to reclaim our narrative, and like the act of crossing out, you know, what different news articles have said, or how we've had headlines for ourselves, and to reclaim that and say, this is how we're going to do that. It really, I hope to continue seeing work like this, because there are so many stories for us to tell, you know, outside of just death. But when we do tell these stories, I'm excited to see how we keep reimagining, how we keep reclaiming, how we keep challenging the archive, challenging how historically people have written about us. You know, recently, Wikipedia, and I like to believe this is because of the film coming out on Netflix, but Wikipedia and every other source out there has had Latasha's birthday wrong. Her birthday was January 1st, 1976. And since her death, everyone has, you know, listed July 14th as her birthday. And that was one of the first things I remember Ty and Shanice telling us when we met them, like her birthday was January 1st. And even in the book that I mentioned, you know, the author mentions Latasha's grandmother bringing out the birth certificate and showing January 1st. And Wikipedia has finally changed her birthday to reflect that. And I even did a little exercise just for myself, you know, deeply inspired by Alexandra's work, of just taking a screenshot of an old Wikipedia page when we were a part of the filming process and crossing out all the wrong information, putting in the correct information. So it's beautiful to see how just a small thing of like, now we have the archive reflect her correct birthday. I think this is such a powerful way of us to just reclaim our narrative, you know, going back again to the work of Saidiya Hartman, her piece Venus in 2X, where she is engaging with this archive that does not have all the information there for her to rebuild this.
Yeah, barely has any information.
Yeah, like using that to understand what does it mean for us to conjure these memories, to conjure these spirits, and be in conversation with you know, these different realms where we believe Latasha still exists, always speaking to Latasha throughout the process of it, but wanting us to feel empowered in telling the archives like they messed up, and telling the newspapers you have this wrong, and that we deserve for our voice to overpower this misinformation, and for us as members of the community, as Black women, as Black folks, however one identifies, to know that they have the power to take back their archive, you know, starting out from your age, Fanta, to younger, to older, to what does that mean to be like, let me start to really think about my family history, or just the history of, you know, people that I knew in the community, and how we can reclaim that for self.
Yeah, and really wanting to challenge the gatekeeping of history and archiving, and, you know, inspiring and emboldening, you know, like Sophia said, young voices to really hold that stake, to really to know at a young age that, you know, not only is archiving, you know, not only is archiving ourselves our responsibility, but let's also find pleasure in that work. Let's find pleasure in remembering, you know, our neighbors, our grandparents, our cousins, and just really taking the onus of what archiving means, especially because we give that responsibility to institutions often, and institutions that don't serve us and don't, you know, weren't built with the intention to serve us, and really taking back that ownership and really, you know, protecting them and safeguarding them like we would our family photo albums.
Yes. one last thing I'll say is just understanding the balance that needs to exist. It's been so beautiful the times whether we're just texting Ty and Shanice or out to lunch with them, letting it exist, that joy and pain, or joy and sorrow and happiness can all exist together. We can, be talking about Latasha's death, and all of a sudden they remember a crazy memory from their childhood and share it with us. And I think that is something that we wanted the film to do, that, there is a balance that needs to exist, this nuance that I don't think people sometimes understand we can talk about. You can laugh and cry in the same, sentence, in the same, span of 5 minutes, and that's healthy and that's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Next up is, why do you think documentary films are so vital today?
Are so what?
Vital.
Oh, That's like the easiest question, but also the hardest thing to answer. I think depending on who is telling the story, they're vital. I think we are still dealing with a reckoning within documentary, within journalism, of understanding power and balance, understanding who has had ownership over stories and who has needed to release ownership. So I think documentaries are vital when the power is back in the hands of those that the story is about. I think documentary is powerful when we are allowed to have a more nuanced conversation and allow memory to converge with facts. I think something that was always challenging for me, I came from a background in journalism, and I was always taught that I need to have something that supports what I'm documenting. I need to have, whether it's a quote, whether it's a documentation, whether it's some piece of evidence that supports and shows why this fact is accurate, but needing to understand that a lot of times for our histories, we don't have that. So I think what I love to see in documentary is a more hybrid approach, where we allow fact and fiction to exist together, because that is sometimes how we are able to reimagine or reclaim these stories. And so I think documentary is vital when the ownership, the power, the resources are in the hands of those whose stories have been stolen from them so often, and now they can tell their truth, they can tell their memories. So some documentary has been very damaging, and some documentary has been very healing. And again, that reckoning and being okay with saying, yo, we have some things that we really need to dismantle and disrupt and challenge. And that's when documentary becomes powerful and important, when we allow those conversations to exist and to really interrogate what has been harmful and how to make this more accessible and more authentic to the community that the story is about.
Yeah, and I think documentary is vital too, because this reckoning that Sophia is talking about is happening. We're witnessing this happening, and that's something, documentary has a huge claim in, media, in the media world, how we make media, how we tell stories about ourselves and our communities. And we're going to see that seep into, every facet of media making. We're going to see that seep into narrative film work. We're going to see that, in more experimental works and stuff like that. So I think that, starting with documentary, or at least, that being a very present reckoning that's happening, I think that that's really going to push forward and help, and I don't know, just really further a lot of other work as well.
And I think what's interesting to note is I'm just now realizing that of our team that worked on production and post, I think I was the only documentary person besides like our two EPs, Elisa and Aubrey. They also were documentary, but Janice is straight like fiction narrative, but I'm trying to get her over into the documentary side. Our producer, Famu Dorji, is like music and narrative. We used an animator who does experimental work. Our colorist, has her own personal artistic practice with the narrative. And so I think that allowed for this, for the hybrid style to really shine. I know that sounds cheesy, but having me as the only documentary person and then everyone else bringing their brilliance from their own like respective fields to be in conversation with my own documentary knowledge. Yeah.
That was great. I'm going to ask a few more questions before I open up the space to questions from the viewers. So could you guys let us know on what you might be working on in the future? Do you see yourself continuing this experimental approach to filmmaking, or are you going to move to something more narrative?
You want me to go first? Okay. So I really miss photography. I began as a photographer, then I really wanted to go to school for cinematography, was very intimidated by it, so studied photojournalism. And then by grad school, I went into documentary film. So I have a personal photo project, a self-portrait project I've been working on called Dreaming Gave Us Wings. And it's like and it's like my goal to focus on that and put all my energy into that. I'm working on a couple of like documentary pitches, but I actually have like so many secret sides to me. Like Janice thinks could be a comedian, and it's like kind of my goal to do like some comedy as a storyteller, not as like in front of the camera. But I find that doing a film like A Love Song for Latasha, which has such a strong style, you know, for itself as a film, not really inspired by anything else or influenced from any other style, it's easy to get pigeonholed, and I don't see myself just staying within documentary. I do consider myself an artist, so I want to allow myself to expand and grow in the ways that I need. As Janice mentioned earlier, this dealing with topics of Black death, of re-engaging with the archive can be very spiritually, mentally, and physically draining. So for me, wanting to do projects that are more like lighthearted, wanting to just let myself, you know, play around with form, from photography to installation to film. I will always love documentary, and my work will always be rooted in that. But I find that through the hybrid style, I'm wanting to expand more into narrative work, and to keep pushing the boundaries of documentary to see how experimental I can really get. But yeah, I feel like right now I am still just excited to keep discovering my voice. And, you know, I'm 33 and have a lot in my background, but there's just still so much for me to learn, and mistakes to be made, and projects to, you know, just birth. And I'm excited to see what comes from that. Janice, I'll let you.
Yeah, what's funny is I'm about to say a lot of the opposite, because I started out in narrative. So a lot of my work is sort of seeping into documentary more. This project that I've been working on for a while, about growing up in Detroit, is slowly becoming more.
It's like a hybrid, and it's a beautiful, beautiful script.
Yeah, so it's slowly becoming a little bit more autobiographical
and experimental.
Yeah, so it's like a lot of my work is sort of basking in what we kind of found in Latasha, and just knowing that, just exploring the fullness of our artistic voices. But this was definitely a strong, a rooting foundation for both of us, I think. So I'm working on a project about Detroit, but I'm also working on a project about a few music artists from the 90s, which is also going to be a little, it's going to be a hybrid sort of documentary, but really playing with form. And so I feel like a lot of our work is kind of in that intersection.
But I like how you say Latasha is like the root. I think this is something I will always revisit. Latasha, it just feels so ingrained in our DNA. I don't know how to ever not think about this work, not revisit it, and not be inspired by what we learned. Yeah. And this is something I will always come back to. It will always be the root of it, no matter how far away I move from documentary, or how much I move back into documentary. A Love Song for Latasha will always remain the root of all the work for me.
We've grown so much throughout the process, just you know, as people, but also as creatives. So it really, it's going to inform a lot of what we do.
Well, that was it for my questions. I just want to thank you guys again for doing this with me. It was an honor to speak to both of you.
Honor for us to speak to you.
Thank you so much. John has anything else he'd like to say, I think aside from that, we can wrap up.
Yeah, thank you, John. Thank you, Fanta, for being such an amazing, wonderful, brilliant moderator, and Bronx Documentary Center for highlighting what the filmmakers in the film. We're so honored.